Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Space Colony for PC and Mac. This is a real-time strategy and life simulation game developed by Firefly Studios and published by Gathering of Developers back in 2003. It later saw an HD re-release as Space Colony HD, which was self-published by Firefly themselves. And what you're seeing here is actually the original game, but patched to the HD version, because they released a patch for it as well. If you had the original game, you can just patch it and you're good to go. HD version basically runs at modern resolutions and up to absolutely massive resolutions. And that's really the only major difference. So, it's a pretty interesting game. If you know what Firefly Studios has done, you know that they did the Stronghold games, which were sort of castle simulation games. This is a pretty big departure from that. I mean, you go from medieval castle building to space colonization. So, how does that actually turn out in the game? Does the transition to sci-fi help or hinder it? And what really happened here? Was this just Stronghold in space, or what? Well, as far as the presentation goes, it wasn't anything particularly impressive at its time. I mean, we're talking about an isometric 2D game here, and everything is sprite work. It looks fine, especially with the environments and the facilities that you're building look quite good, actually. The character designs look odd, but they work, and they're certainly kind of goofy. I'm not a big fan of them. I've just never been a fan of that particular art style when it comes to character designs. And so it's kind of a hit or miss thing, but it doesn't look bad. And that's the thing. The game came out in 2003, and the graphics still hold up pretty well, especially if you install the HD patch, which just brings the resolution out. And, of course, the interface is intuitive, it works very well, and you never really feel like anything is badly placed or badly drawn or anything. It just looks quite good. So the 2D art style certainly becomes a benefit rather than a detriment. And then there's the sound design, which is pretty good overall. They have some fairly catchy music, and a lot of it's rather atmospheric, space-sounding music that works pretty well. The voice acting is sometimes hit or miss, but it's all kind of silly, except for basically Venus, who is pretty much the only fairly normal person in the entire colony. So, you get some interesting characters here that work pretty well as just wacky voices. And none of the voice acting is particularly bad. It's just silly, and that may or may not work for you. And there's the sound effects, which there's nothing really to write home about here. They work pretty well, and that's about all I can say for them. But obviously what really matter here are the story and the gameplay, although the story is really the weakest part of this game, as the plot itself basically revolves around completing a bunch of missions for Blackwater Industries, where everybody's just there because, hey, space colony work. Yay, we get paid for stuff in space. It's cool, right? And of course, Blackwater Industries is run by a very crazy, kind of hyper-capitalist. So, things get goofy, and the sense of humor does propel it forward, but the plot itself is extremely thin. What there basically is of it. There's not much of a plot to this thing other than complete the missions. And so it really does fall to the gameplay. And this is where things get pretty interesting, because this game is a mishmash of ideas. Obviously you have your campaign mode, and that's basically just do exactly what the thing tells you to do. As in, you build a certain type of building at a certain time, and you let the thing play out. You get whatever it was you needed to complete the mission, and you move on to the next mission. Occasionally the missions will throw a curveball at you and expect you to suddenly have to deal with alien infestations or things like that. And so there is some variety to the campaign, and there are some good dialogue lines here and there, but by and large it's a fairly straightforward campaign that's just good for its mission variety more than anything else. There are, of course, additional modes to the campaign, like Galaxy Mode, where you just have a bunch of planets, and it's basically a mission mode, where you just go to a planet, and it has certain conditions that, if you fulfill those conditions, you win. and you have just a bunch of planets to play around with. And then, of course, there's the Sandbox Mode, which is pretty much self-explanatory. You just build whatever the heck you want. And then there's the Planet Editor, which is pretty cool. You get to design your own levels in the game. That's something they also did with Stronghold, and it works rather well here, in addition to having worked well in Stronghold. So that adds some longevity to the game. You can design your own levels and play custom levels from other people. It's pretty nice. But what's the gameplay like itself? Well, you have the base building aspect, where you have to place the various structures, the habitats, the corridors, the airlocks, that sort of thing, in order to house your colony. And then you place facilities within those structures. These can be things like beds, or cleaning stations, or food, or any number of things that are necessary for your people to live. This includes things like entertainment, where some people like shopping, some people like to eat, some people like to exercise, or to dance, or play music, or any number of things like that. And so, having a good variety of things to do will keep your colonists happy. And there's also the various needs that aren't necessarily obvious. Obviously they need food, obviously they need rest, obviously they would need some entertainment from time to time. They also need some psychological help every so often. They need to talk to people, they need to do things like meditate, or to have counseling, or things like that. And so that plays a part in the game as well. You're basically trying to keep all of your colonists happy enough that they'll actually do their jobs right. And they need to do their jobs right so you can get access to all the different things that you need to get. For example, one mission might have you meeting a quota of mining. Well, if the guy who you got doing mining is just throwing a temper tantrum, or has had an emotional breakdown or something, you need to resolve that, because these missions are usually timed. And so your deadline is approaching, and he's not doing his job, which in turn means that you might actually fail the mission. So you gotta take care of these people. And each of the 20 characters that you get access to has their own likes, dislikes, their own people that they like to hang out with, that sort of thing. And this changes over time. You can build up relationships between the various characters, and you can, of course, get these people better at their jobs because they also have skills. Some of them have lots of different skills. For example, Venus is good at numerous things. She's pretty much a jack of all trades. And then other characters are just useless, like Candy, where her entire thing is that she's a shopaholic, and that's about it, so she just doesn't have any skills. And so there's all these different things that you have to keep in mind. You can build up their skills by, of course, them just doing the thing that they need to do, but also building facilities that allow them to actually train themselves. And so that certainly helps with getting everything rolling. You just need to know what you need to do to get all of your people behaving optimally. And so the game plays out like this kind of odd hybrid of an actual kind of management strategy game, as well as a life simulation, in the vein of something like The Sims, for example. If you played The Sims, then you know that every single character has their own various needs, and you need to fulfill those needs in order for them to progress. Well, this takes that and implements it in a game with actual objectives, which makes the thing a lot more interesting than something like The Sims. And there's actually quite a bit of longevity to this game. There's quite a few things to do. You have a lot of structures to build, and both the campaign and the galaxy mode will keep you going for quite a while. It's a pretty fun game, and at no point does it ever really feel tedious, which you may think it might. You might think that there are certain parts of the game where you're just kind of waiting for things to happen, and that gets tedious. Not very often. because the sense of humor is what really helps there. The game is just flat out silly. And so people are always saying ridiculous things, they're always behaving in a ridiculous manner, and there's always something that comes up to keep you doing things as opposed to just sitting around waiting for stuff to happen. And so that's pretty nice. They managed to pull this off pretty well. Is it a masterpiece? By no means. It has problems. There's a lack of multiplayer, for example. And so there's all sorts of things that they could do to improve it. Obviously more variety, they could have added some expansions or more modes. All sorts of things like that to make this thing better. And hopefully they'll revisit Space Colony at some point and make a sequel to it. A proper sequel as opposed to an HD re-release like this. And so what you have here is a very interesting, very unusual kind of game. And it works. It's not particularly mind-bogglingly complex or anything like that. It's pretty easy to pick up and play, but it takes you a while to master things. And you do feel like you have enough variety that it keeps you interested. Of course, it's not for everyone. If you don't like something where you have to manage people's moods and things like that, then you'll probably not get a whole lot out of this. But for those of you who do find that fairly interesting, there's a fair amount to have here. It's a fun game that's well worth playing, even if it doesn't reach Stronghold or Stronghold Crusader levels of greatness like Firefly did before this. I give it a 3.5 out of 5. Thanks for watching.